As was mentioned, we have done work with Block 1 on developing EOS. Our engineers provide the lion's share of engineering for the core EOS platform. But that's not what my talk is about today. My talk is about blockchain in general and its use as a tool. And I think this is probably an audience that's a little more sophisticated than what I was targeting, but we'll run through it anyway. So, big question is blockchain a magic bullet? Well, of course not, because it's a tool. It's a very useful tool, but it's not all things to everyone. But that's not to say that there aren't magic bullets out there, and this isn't going. Anyway, so there's magic bullets that can cut your food and fuel conspiracy and help you read and help you move. So that's some examples of magic bullets. Blockchain is a useful tool for many scenarios. Well, provides various attributes that help with that make it useful, such as irreversibility. So as data gets added to the blockchain, as transactions get added to blocks, those become irreversible. They become validated and become irreversible, which makes it a permanent record. It's decentralized, provides decentralization, so that means that the physical location of where the data is stored is spread all over, ideally all over the globe, and eventually points beyond. And also, blockchain supports disintermediation, which is a concept of streamlining transactional processes because the data is irreversible and because it's decentralized. You can create contracts that streamline business processes. So think transactions that today require agents like real estate sales. You could theoretically have contracts on the blockchain that facilitate that without having some middle person taking a cut, because that middle person taking a cut represents friction and loss. Still, as though it's a useful tool, it's not universal. It still has to fit whatever the scenario is that you have to that you have at hand. So the reality of using blockchain is there's three characteristics that I've called out: usability, performance, and scaling. And so what do these things mean? So usability is how hard is it for you to incorporate a particular blockchain tool into your environment? For instance, how hard is it to set up a development environment? If you work through, if you're using a package that you can install and start working with in a few steps, that's great. But if it takes 20 or 30 steps to install, that may not be the tool for you. Is using this tool going to bust your budget? some blockchains are free to use, free to install, and free to write programs for, and get going, but they have per transaction costs. Now, those per transaction costs, if you're generating lots and lots of transactions, might actually bust your budget. So does this tool really give something that I don't already have? This is probably the biggest question that I've encountered with people who've asked me about using blockchain is, really it's a database, and it's a database with additional characteristics, but if they don't really need those characteristics, maybe they don't need the blockchain. I had a situation where a customer came to us and they went to our website, and OCI does a lot of other stuff besides blockchain development, and this company actually hired us to do other work, but someone looked at our web page, saw the word blockchain, and said, "Oh, I want blockchain." And so the lead engineer on that project came to me and said, they want blockchain. And so I sat down with a buddy and we talked about it. We said, okay, what do they want to do? And we went through half a dozen steps, or half a dozen possibilities, and every single one of them, we said, no, this is not a fit for blockchain. He went back to the customer and said, we really don't see a use case for blockchain here. The guy said, I don't care, I want blockchain. So, anyway, we're going to try to give him blockchain. Okay, so there are steps being taken to address usability, and here's a few examples. Now, I produced this list actually back in May, and 4 months is a lifetime of blockchain, so some of these things are a little dated, but you can see a list of usability improvements that have been happening on some of the popular blockchains. So next area to look at is performance. And by performance, I mean, is it going to keep up with the needs of my application? Is it going to be fast enough? Is it going to settle transactions quick enough? How well will this work for me? And so you have metrics that you have to consider, like timeliness. Is it going to be able to settle a transaction quick enough for my use case so that, like someone said this morning, a point of sale, where right now credit card companies basically can return an approval within a fraction of a second. So will my blockchain be able to perform at that rate? Resource consumption. It may be the quickest blockchain in the world, but if it consumes a ton of data, a ton of RAM and a ton of CPU and everything, that could be a problem. So computational accuracy and design correctness. Is the code buggy? Because it could work quick, but if it comes to the wrong conclusion or it doesn't actually save your data, it's not going to be a good tool. Robustness in the face of bad input. You've heard of garbage in, garbage out. Well, so a good solid tool is going to be able to take that garbage in and not and be able to reject it. Sort of like what Rodrigo was talking about with the Patronus tool. That's a filter that helps deal with bad input. Okay, so scaling is the third aspect of performance or of consideration. is, as your process grows, as your usage, as the user base for your project grows, is this blockchain that you've selected, or I guess that you're considering, will be able to keep up with the growth. So, it may have had the raw performance when you had 100 clients to keep up. What happens when you have 10,000 clients or 1 million clients? We'll be able to keep up. We'll be able to serve everyone at the same time without falling over. And again, this was a few months old, but there was an episode with CryptoKitties that kind of crippled the Ethereum network. Okay, so how are scaling the chain being addressed? So there's a few opportunities that are happening. And again, this is a little old, but Lightning Chain on Bitcoin, and Ethereum's use of sharding, which I'm not going to get into because you all know it better than me. And EOS is working on inter-blockchain communication to support multiple threads or multiple chains. And so, in conclusion, blockchain is a useful tool, but it is not a magic bullet. It should be considered alongside any other tool to make sure that you are getting something that's useful for your need and not just something that satisfies the whim of some vice president who wants blockchain. Right. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's beer 30.
Any last questions for Phil? No? Oh, two?
What was the biggest challenge that you had when you were kind of creating that protocol and creating videos, doing the technical work? Was there any something that just kind of...
And Phil, if you could repeat.
Yeah, there's many. So,
And Phil, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, what really caught me by surprise when I was working on the EOS protocol? So, sir, I don't know your name. Okay. Jason's right. My particular task was actually implementing the peer-to-peer programming, the peer-to-peer protocol, and we found lots of things. Probably the biggest thing was how to deal with large messages. So the protocol ensures that every block and every transaction that is produced by any producer or any node is propagated throughout the entire network using an asynchronous protocol. I'm going to get really into the weeds here, so I'll try not to. But anyway, we found that we tried to add some hooks for efficiency to avoid redundant copies of messages. It turned out that by saving the redundant copies of messages, we ended up using more time passing around notifications of messages, and so that was sort of counterintuitive, and we ended up just abandoning that and saying it's quicker just to send multiple block copies or whatever. I could go a lot more, but I don't think any other questions. Luke.
I haven't had a chance to ask you this, and I was curious, having been there as this was all happening, and you even mentioned cross-chain blockchain communication was something that was promised but not delivered. There's been people talking about, what about the features of EOS.io that weren't delivered? What are your thoughts on some of those features that weren't delivered and the timelines you were given to develop this and all that?
So, from the outside, I'm sure you've all seen, especially you who have been involved with EOS from the beginning, there have been various points at which times radical changes happened to the infrastructure. And from the outset, it probably looked capricious or random, but it was really situations where technical issues were found, and what would happen is Monday morning, Dan would come into the office and would have redesigned a major portion of whatever, and then we had to re-implement all that. And unfortunately, and typically this was like the week before a release, and so we would have to prioritize sorting that out and making sure the tests that we had passed, and features, optional features, optimizations just were de-emphasized. When you're writing good quality software, first you make it work, then you make it work fast, then you make it work easily. And so that first making it work is still happening, just because there's a laundry list of features that have to get in to make this a good, solid, robust product. And EOS has only been out for 4 months, and EOS or Ethereum has been out for 4 years. So we have a ways to go to catch up, and so I'm sure within the next 3.5 years there'll be substantial changes and improvements. Any other questions? Yes.
So with inter-blockchain communications, I think pretty universally the potential's seen, but I'm curious about your perspective on the technical hurdles. And full disclosure, I don't have the technical knowledge, but my assumption is by going EOS-based chain to EOS-based chain, that's a much simpler and probably something we'll see in the very near future compared to atomic swaps that we would see across like Bitcoin to Ethereum or Ethereum to EOS. So I'm just curious of your perspective of the technical hurdles and what you see coming in that arena.
Yes, you're exactly right. I think it'll be a lot easier to go EOS to EOS because you have the benefit of a common library, common data definitions. There's things like Merkle roots that have to be transported and transformed somehow. So it's not a no-brainer. Going across other protocols or other blockchains is going to require basically a secondary layer, a secondary protocol, which provides a lingua franca across all implementations. And what we'll probably end up seeing is initially this common protocol, whatever it is, will be proposed hopefully by some third-party organization that is not a block producer or is not a blockchain producer, but is responsible for defining a standard protocol, and eventually, and initially it'll be ignored, but eventually what will happen is blockchain producers will come to realize that if they want to stay relevant, they'll have to support that protocol so that you can share information between all the different blockchains. Yeah, so the question is, will other producers, other blockchain producers have to be responsible for supporting the secondary protocol? And yes. And nobody's going to hold a gun to their head and say you have to do this. But what's going to happen is this standard will become it'll become a standard. And so if you want to, it's not necessarily communicating with EOS, but communicating between any blockchain implementations. If you want to, if you have, I can't even think of a good scenario now, but if you want to have someone be able to trade a direct trade of a Bitcoin to an EOS contract, it's going to require a common protocol between both of those blockchains. Okay? Okay, anything else?
If there's no other questions, thank you, Phil.